Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Quianna Canada. Welcome back to Quianna's show. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening we are going to be discussing President Trump's bilateral meeting with the Taoiseach of Ireland, which is Micheál Martin. And before we do, I want to wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day. Hopefully you went out, you had fun with your friends, you drank, you maybe went to a parade. There's so much to do on St. Patrick's Day. I didn't go out for St. Patrick's Day because, again, I am a teetotaler. I don't drink alcohol, and it's possibly like 10-15 minutes from my home if I walk to the city center, and I just didn't feel like being like in an environment where there's just like it's so boisterous and people are drinking, essentially. But on another note, I did really enjoy St. Patrick's Day when I lived in the United States. My favorite place to go for St. Patrick's Day was in San Antonio because there was a river walk, and every St. Patrick's Day the city would paint the river walk, the water, of course, the river, green, and the river walk in San Antonio, that area, there's just so much to do. The festivities are amazing. It's never a dull moment in San Antonio. But that's not what we are talking about this evening. We are talking about the bilateral meeting that Trump had with the Taoiseach of the Republic of Ireland. Now, I think that if you are light on the history and the political positioning of the Republic of Ireland as it relates to international conflicts, you would be quite crestfallen with this particular meeting. Howsoever, others who may not really know much about Republic of Ireland and the demands of the people, and possibly comparing Micheál Martin's meeting with President Zelensky's meeting, I think that some would argue that Micheál Martin performed well. He excelled in the Oval Office with President Donald Trump. It cannot be denied that the Oval Office, when you have President Trump, you have J.D. Vance, the Vice President, and you have Marco Rubio and other security officials within the office, it can be quite intimidating to some to sit in that office and to speak on the behalf of not only your nation, but on the behalf of an international community, right? And I think that that was the expectation today. I think that many expected for Micheál Martin or Micheál Martin for his voice. I think some expected for his voice to be stronger, louder, which did not quite happen. For example, just a moment, I will we'll get into this. So earlier this week, and I think even earlier today, Amnesty International took to its Facebook account and published a statement that said, Amnesty International Ireland members from across the country are calling on our Taoiseach to be brave this St. Patrick's Day when meeting President Trump. He should denounce Israel's genocide in Gaza during the visit. Now, it's important to state that the United States holds a entirely different position. The Trump administration holds an entirely different position as well. They don't believe that what has happened in Gaza is a genocide. But it's important for me to state, since we're talking about this, that the killing of any person unjustly that is not part of the war, that's men, women, and children, especially children, is always wrong, no matter what side it is on. And I think in situations like this, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, prouds itself on being a country of neutrality, being a very neutral country, but has that really shown through its political stances over the last couple of years. And I would argue, no, Ireland has not necessarily been neutral. And that I'm not arguing that that is a bad thing or that's a good thing. That's just stating what is obvious. Ireland has obviously taken a position, and so that does not necessarily mean that the Taoiseach has taken a position. Micheál Martin, the citizens of Ireland, and perhaps the President of Ireland has taken a strong position, but that position may not reflect the views of every person and every political leader within the Republic of Ireland. So yesterday, Amnesty International Ireland said, in 24 hours' time, our Taoiseach will meet with President Trump for St. Patrick's Day. Capitulation can't be an option. It will take courage, but with courage comes hope. And hope is an act of resistance. The world needs to hear that Ireland stands for human rights. And I don't think that we heard that in the Oval Office today. So I don't think that we heard a resounding voice for the protection of human rights in general from Micheál Martin. In my personal opinion, it seemed more as the Taoiseach of the Republic of Ireland sought to show the similarities between Ireland and the United States. Indeed, Donald Trump stated during the bilateral meeting that there are more Irish people within the United States than there are in the Republic of Ireland. Now, there may be some truth to that because the United States is a bigger nation than the Republic of Ireland, right? But I don't think that the citizens or Amnesty International heard a resounding voice from the Taoiseach as it relates to human rights. And that raises an important question as to whether they're crestfallen and perhaps disenchanted by the meeting today. There's another message that was posted to Amnesty International's Facebook account that said, "Did you see our Amnesty van on O'Connell Street in Dublin? We ask that our Taoiseach's voice be clear and confident in standing for international justice and the dignity of all people this St. Patrick's Day when meeting President Trump." And so I guess that Amnesty International was hoping that there would be a firm stance on a particular human rights issue today in the Oval Office, maybe castigation of the United States participation in international conflicts, all of which we did not see during this meeting. Now, that does not mean that there won't be any off-camera discussions. There is a high probability that the Taoiseach was not, didn't have the bravado, right? Or excuse me, didn't have the bravado to have this discussion or to stand firm in the demands of the people of Ireland, to stand firm in those demands and to deliver those demands in front of the cameras within the Oval Office. Again, the Oval Office is probably an intimidating place to be in for any world leader. And you have specific leaders, American leaders, that are quite intimidating, such as President Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, and it can be quite intimidating to face that group of men. It can be intimidating to face a group of men with the belief sets that they do have, especially when it comes to international conflicts, to face them in the Oval Office and to issue demands to them. So I don't think that it was realistic to some degree for Amnesty International Ireland to ask for the Taoiseach to stand firm and to confront Trump in the Oval Office, when, of course, Amnesty International is unwilling to do that here in Ireland. There's been multiple occasions where Amnesty International has remained silent on human rights violations and has not spoken out against those violations. So how can it goes back, ladies and gentlemen, to hypocrisy, right? And we're asking for someone to do something that we aren't willing to do ourselves. And while Amnesty International can write on its Facebook page to do A, B, C, and D, it's quite different when you are stepping in the Oval Office and you are attempting to secure privileges, and not only privileges, but you're making attempts to stabilize relations with a nation that can be quite volatile. And so I think that if the roles were reversed, I think that Amnesty International too would have quite a difficult time vocalizing where it wants the United States to position itself as it relates to human rights. And I've had these discussions before here in here in Northern Ireland. For example, I've seen many times where there has been critical views of the United States and our leaders in the United States. And I've been very critical of our leaders in the United States. I'm an American citizen, and a lot that the United States does, I don't agree with it. And you can go to my Substack and of course, my YouTube page will show you exactly where I really stand politically. But in my discussions with Irish people here in Northern Ireland, I have I've tried on numerous occasions to explain to them that there is a high probability that their leaders feel the same way that American leaders feel about what's happening. So, for example, Trump said this in the Oval Office, quote, "People in Ireland are happy I'm getting rid of nuclear power and nuclear," and he used the T word, "arrest," right? End quote. And Taoiseach Micheál Martin didn't disagree with that. He didn't push back on that. He actually smiled when Donald Trump said it. And that leads me to believe that what I've been saying this entire time is right, that certain politicians like Taoiseach Micheál Martin, they are more involved in what's going on internationally than some of us would like to admit. President Trump also stated during that bilateral meeting that some of the Iranian missiles would have likely hit Ireland, and the Taoiseach did not disagree with that. The Taoiseach didn't push back on that. There was, I guess, there was a look of acceptance and agreeing that that is a possibility. And so, I don't know. I think that some would watch this video and they would disagree with me. And they would disagree with my political commentary as it relates to that bilateral meeting. And they would say that there wasn't enough time to really hold a serious discussion about international law and conflicts, right? And quiet as kept, to reiterate, this could still be a conversation that is happening off the record, that's happening behind the scenes and not in front of the cameras. And this entire discussion, ladies and gentlemen, it really reminds me of vocabularies of motive. So I want to read to you an excerpt about this, and we can discuss this a little bit. The term was first developed by sociologist C.W. Wright Mills to capture the language by which people describe their motivations and account for their conduct. The important point is that Mills' idea is not rooted in psychology of motivation. He was not interested in the needs, drives, or inner compulsions, as was Sigmund Freud. Rather, his concern was with the way in which people talk about their motives, in particular social context. So, thinking about this, how did the Taoiseach Micheál Martin talk about his motives during this meeting? To be honest, some would say that his presence in the Oval Office was milquetoast, right? And I'm not denigrating the Taoiseach of the Republic of Ireland, but I'm giving a fair and honest assessment of what could be the perception and the evaluation or analysis of that meeting that Micheál Martin had with Trump. Motivational talk is usually part of a wider ideology such that certain stated motives will be much more acceptable in given context than in others. Motivational statements are hence relative. For instance, irrespective of the underlying psychological motivation, a prime minister, a world leader, a Taoiseach may make different motivational claims about his stance on human rights to his peers or to world leaders, to his family, to the courtroom, to a criminologist, to the International Court of Justice, or even to himself. But that may be different, ladies and gentlemen. The context and significant, the context of what that stance may be could shift, and it can shift when it's being told to others. So, for example, while the Taoiseach is in the Republic of Ireland, I'm sorry I didn't say that quite eloquently enough, so I'll read that just again. The context and significant others shift what will be said in the motivational account. So the motive within the Republic of Ireland may be something entirely different, right? The Taoiseach is within his homeland. He is in charge. He is in charge of the people, of course. The Taoiseach is in a much more powerful position to speak freely about his position on international human rights and conflicts, and to disagree and condemn and perhaps chastise the President of the United States, whereas on the soil of the United States, especially within the Oval Office, when surrounded by powerful leaders, and after witnessing the talks with Zelensky and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, there is likely a motivation not to repeat that, right? Of course, no world leader wants to go viral because they have been talked down like a child in the Oval Office by President Trump and J.D. Vance. And so I think that was what Micheál Martin was attempting to avoid. That was his motivation, right? To avoid being held in contempt in front of U.S. leaders as well as the world. Sociologists have been concerned with the ways in which such talks help interactions proceed smoothly. So again, to reiterate, I think some would argue that by not taking a disputatious stance and questioning Trump in the Oval Office, that bilateral meeting ran smoothly. Some would argue that. Others, probably not. They have explored the sources of motivational statements, classified their different varieties, and examined the consequences of their accepted stance or rejection. So, thinking about this, did the Taoiseach want his views and positions to be accepted? And the answer to that question is likely yes, right? If the Taoiseach went in there with the disposition that Amnesty International wanted him to go in there with, yes, could he have been things could have went really well. So, for example, the Taoiseach could have confronted President Donald Trump and did so aggressively and looked like a hero to the world, but then ruined those bilateral relations with the U.S. president, as well as, really ruined those bilateral relations with the United States and those agreements and any issue that the Taoiseach sought to resolve on this visit. There is something else that was apparent. So again, they talked about very briefly about the international conflict in Iran, and some would argue that President Donald Trump used techniques of neutralization as it relates to this conflict. Some would argue that even in the conflict in Iran or conflicts abroad in each country, right, that there was denying of the victim by not only Donald Trump, but by Micheál Martin in the Oval Office. I mean, he was smiling, and I think that some Irish people would be upset with the Taoiseach for bringing President Donald Trump shamrocks. I seen like a bowl of shamrocks between between Donald Trump and Micheál Martin, and that was a request that some people made, is for the Taoiseach not to have given the U.S. president a bowl of shamrocks, which was quite visible during that meeting. And again, that could have soured the relations between President Donald Trump and the Taoiseach. And I think that the goal of this meeting for the Taoiseach was to secure its partnership with the United States. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but that's what I think. That's what I think the goal was. I think that the Taoiseach was handled that meeting very well. And but going back, some would argue that the Taoiseach probably denied responsibility, denied injury, really condemned, that they actually condemned the condemners. So the condemners are the Iran, because there is an argument that is holding up to scrutiny that Iran was not going to attack the United States. And so now Iran is condemning, and the international community is condemning the United States for engaging in war with Iran, taking that first step, that act of aggression. And by doing so, what we're saying now is that President Donald Trump is condemning, essentially condemning Iran instead of actually taking responsibility. And then, of course, lastly is appealing to higher loyalties, and that is that this war is going to save us all and to prevent missiles from flying across the sky. And some would agree that that is what we all want. We want to be safe. And then some would agree that that would never happen, that that was not going to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, this video has gone on long enough. Tell me what you think. Do you think that this meeting with Micheál Martin went well? If you do, don't forget to share it in the description, the chat below. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.